Hello Rotterdam White Scars fans, my name is Thijs, a.k.a. the Shamanpainter. Today we'll be painting Ramsay Bolton from the Song of Ice and Fire miniature game. He's a neutral hero from the Neutral Heroes box 1. And as you see, I've already primed the model with Chaos Black and then did a Zenithal highlight, which is just a spray of white paint just from the top. It makes it easier to see all the features on the model, and it helps me show what parts of the model I'm painting. I also did the base real quick with some texture paint from Citadel, and I started out painting all the cloth part with dried bark. I always like to start with the deepest parts of the model. What I should have done was started out with the cloak, because it's between its legs, but that's all good. And then after the cloth parts, I started out with the leather parts, and I started with a rhinox hide, which is a warmer tone of brown to just define the difference between the cloth and the leather parts. As you can see, I take my time with the first step, the base layers. It makes it a lot easier if you are really precise in the first steps, and you don't have to clean up as much later on. It was quite a characteristic model. As you can see, it's not really cartoony, but it's almost starting to look cartoony with the face and the big belly and the armor and the fur and the cloak and the big sword and the big helmet. But that's fine. It's a really characteristic model, and it's a cool character indeed. As you can see, I'm using some new brushes, as I'm also applying some dried bark on the fur parts. I'm using broken toed brushes. You have a lot of options nowadays, when it's Winsor Newton, Raphael, Artist Opus, broken toed. Yeah, I thought, why not give it a shot? To be honest, next time we'll probably use my Raphael brushes again, or Winsor Newton. I thought the bristles were a bit too long for my taste, but hey, it's nice that we have an option. And today I'm also using two sizes. One is a kind of larger brush. I always tend to use larger brushes, mostly size 1. I never go really below size 0. Only when I have to do something like painting eyes or something. But I even do edge highlights or small details or freehand work with the number 1 brush, because it holds a lot of paint and it's easier to do some longer strokes on the model with paint. Now, as you can see, I'm starting out with characteristic colors of the Boltons. The pink, almost blood-like, flesh-like color, and it's a screamer pink base color from Citadel. It's not really, it's a bit intermediate color between purple and pink, and I really like the color because it's, when you put on the layers and the shades, you can really notice it being a very dark deep color, although it seems very bright at the moment. And it's a great contrast to have such a vibrant cape compared to the brown tones of the rest of the model. I also painted the helmet a purple color, as if it was some kind of flayed skin looking helmet. It almost looks like it's made out of human skin. Probably is, because it's a Bolton, huh? Yeah, and you see me here also touching up some of the glove parts, because I spilled some screaming pink on the gloves and had to paint in brown inside as well. Once you see me starting out with the opaque colors, so not the metallics yet. That's mainly because it will spoil your paint water with the metallic flakes in the paint. And I'm now starting to paint the skin, which is only the face, and I use Iron Art Deepkin Flash from the elven skin color, Deepkin Elves, I start out with painting the forehead, because if you have too much paint on your brush, I'm also using the smaller brush at the moment, the forehead is the biggest part of the face, so you have a lot of room to get rid of the excess paint, excess amount of paint. I always like to really take my time, do 1 or 2 or multiple layers, thin layers. And this is the moment that I really started doubting what color I had to use for the hair. My original plan was to do it, almost grayish brown, but I wasn't sure, so I skipped the hair and continued painting the metallic parts of the miniature. And as you can see, I changed from Citadel colors to Vallejo colors, and that is one main reason. I really like the consistency of the Citadel colors from Games Workshop. If you have a red or a blue, it's always the same consistency. Vallejo can vary quite a bit between the different colors, but when it comes to metallic paints, the paint doesn't really use pigments. It more or less uses metal flakes in the paint medium. And what you can see with Vallejo colors is that their flakes are much more fine and much more consistent in color. If you use a let's say lead belcher, you can see, if you look really close, the flakes are a couple colors mixed in together, almost like a coffee with all types of beans, but in this case flakes. And when you see the Vallejo colors, they're much more fine and much more saturated with the metallic flakes. Here you can see me use Iron Warriors from Citadel. It doesn't mean I don't use Citadel metallics. I use them for a different purpose. So when I do a more rough metal, just like the armor in this case, or the sword, I will use those colors. But if I want to do a refined type of metal, just like the hilt or the buttons of his cloak, then I will use the Vallejo colors. You can also see how watery the metal color is from Games Workshop. It's fresh out of the pot without mixing in any water. I don't really like to use water in metallic colors, to be quite honest. I like to put them on thick. That's mainly because metal doesn't, the flakes kind of separate when you put in water, and it will go all over the place, with more flakes on one side than more flakes in other parts of the model when you're painting. You see me here putting on a second layer of Scream Pink. I changed my paint pot, my water in the paint pot to, because it was full of metal flakes, because I used to paint metal. I also washed out my brushes real carefully. Oh, and here you see finally deciding to actually paint the hair Rhinox height. I really liked to paint it dried bark, but the fur next to the hair was already dried bark, so it wouldn't really work. But what I'm planning to do is painting the hair with Gorther Brown and Bainblade Brown as the highlights, which are the highlights for dried bark, to still give it that grayish brown look, like he hasn't been taking care of his hair or his physical well-being. It's also the reason why I choose the green skin color. It gives out a bit of a sick feeling, and of course he has a sick mind, as what you've seen he's done to Reek in the previous video. This is the guy who tortured him quite badly. Well, you see me here taking my time, putting in the washes. This is Agrax Earthshade, and it's used all over the model. We use Druchii Violet for the purple parts, and we'll use some Drakenhof Nightshade, a bluish wash. You can see me right here on the silver parts to make it look more fancy, and also on the blade, as if it was a hardened or tempered steel blade. It gives out this bluish sheen, and I think it works out really well. It gives a bit more variety in the textures and the colors, and That's what we want. Yeah, you can see me here starting out with the purple, with the Drucci violet, carefully covering the entire cloak, making sure it doesn't create big droplets of wash. And if it happens, you have to be really quick, or otherwise let it settle, because it might create circles of dark dried up wash if you remove them too late. It's also a moment that I realized, I already did the basing, so why not already, when I have to wait for the model to dry, why not wait for the base to dry as well while we're at it. Although it's not the most famous character of the Neutral Heroes Box 1, if you compare it to Littlefinger or the Spider, Varys and Peter, it is one of the nicest looking models of the set, I think. Here I'm using Reichling Flesh Shade to give a little bit more livelihood into his face, and as Reichling Flesh Shade is a warm, almost reddish wash for her skin, it really contrasts well with the greenish glow in the skin tone of the base layer. Here we go. Well, and this is the step. This means that we're in the halfway mark, because we're starting to layer. And if you look at it time-wise, it's almost halfway into painting this model. So we're starting out with dried bark, Gorthro brown. And what we do with Gorthro brown, it's a technique that I always like to use when I like to create some cool blends. I will water it down quite a bit until it's kind of a milky consistency, as you can see. Put a stripe down and then fade it out. That way you will create a lot of coverage at the brightest part, and it will slowly fade into the base color. So this is all across the model, and pieces of cloth are perfect for this because they have folds and cracks that you can still keep the base layer visible, or the shade still dried up visible. And then we'll finish with a bit of Baneblade brown. As you can see, I really like to use my thumbnail to get rid of the excess paint. It's the closest thing to me and looks like a palette, so why not use a palette and use just a thin line at the end of the fade that we just created with the Gorthro brown. I'm putting a lot of time and effort in these cloth and leather parts. A lot of people would spend a lot of time on the cloak and then just quickly do the leather parts, but I believe if you put some extra time in these small details, it will really make the model pop out a lot more. Also coming in with the Rhinox hide, covering the leather belts and gloves and of course the boots. And I'm gonna be a bit more unorthodox. Also finishing up some parts I forgot with the parts of the hilt, also with Gorthor and I just quickly did the hilt because I forgot the part with and I did it with Gorthor and Baneblade. And you see here me starting out with Scrag Brown, putting on a palette, almost nothing on my brush right now, and I will mix in the dirty Scrag Brown brush with the Rhinox hide, and then I don't wash my brush at this step. I just keep on adding in Scrag Brown into the mixture in my brush. It's almost like a loaded brush technique, you might say, and continue putting in more Scrag Brown and just putting touches of color in there and because the difference between grinding side and scratch brown is so large. You have to be really careful that you don't get any visible layers that has to be blended in real smooth. So this is the last step, and I will put in some pure scratch brown as a final highlight, doing the edge highlight on the leather parts, and really just taking my time. If you have a belt, really do a nice edge highlight on there, so you really define it as a belt. And as these belts are covering the metal parts, it will really pop out, and it's in the center of the model. It's at this belly button, so it makes sense to, especially when the model is posed like this, really open, this belly up front, not covered by a shield or a weapon. It really helps to take some time, putting some extra time in these little details. Now we're going to start with the fun part. It's the cloak. The cloaks are really always a fun thing to paint, always really easy when you see where you have to put your highlights. You can just follow the edges and the natural flow of the cloak. I think the cloak is a really good way to learn where to place your highlights and how to do different volumes. I'm covering most of the model, still leaving in the shade, of course, and I'm not doing as much as the base color, but doing a fair amount of repainting. Then we're gonna come in with some pink horror and mix it in real careful. Mix it in with the screaming pink, also milky consistency. What I like to do is don't start out with the big parts. Start out with a small stripe and work your way from the center of the highlight. Put down the first stripe, then thicken out the layer next to it. Maybe even using less paint on your brush, or using the paint that is still left on your brush. But yeah, take your time for this step. Don't do too much at first. You can do multiple layers of the same layer color as a highlight. That's no problem at all. You don't have to do it in one quick final step. And then some pure pink horror, only doing the middle parts of the highlights, and really make sure all the contours of the cloak are highly visible. As you can see, I'm taking my time with this and just building up the layers of paint, doing multiple steps, one at a time. Take your time. It's a hobby, guys, so enjoy this moment, because these are the most rewarding parts of the miniature. It makes the miniature really pop. And it's the most visible part of the miniature as well, besides the face. And then we'll finish with Emperor's Children, really bright pink color. And if you just compare on the palette the pink compared to the base layer Screamer Pink, what a difference in light and dark that is. So another reason to really take your time, because the contrast is so large. If you would have put Emperor's Children pink directly on Screamer Pink, it wouldn't look nice. It wouldn't work at all. You have to build up the layers in between to make a smooth transition. Now this is the crazy work. I actually painted every single piece of fur individually. And this is also, these are details that I mentioned before that make the difference. It's I wouldn't have done this on a foot soldier, of course. I would just dry brush this part and be done with it. But it's a character, guys. Take your time, put some extra effort in it. It's one of your showpieces in your army. Why not? It's Dawnstone, by the way. And then we will end with Administratum Grey. And to make it a grayish, wolf-like fur. Little reference to the Starks, of course. And what you can see that, although it's dried bark, in the cloth parts are also painted dried bark as a base layer, and what we want to create is some harmony between the different colors. So if we painted 3 different kinds of brown, we would have it wouldn't work. Your eyes or your brain couldn't figure out what kind of paint it is, and now it makes a one nice harmonious miniature because you use the same base layer, although you layered it differently. Painting back the some color with Flayed One Flesh. It's a bit warmer color, although it's Flayed One. Putting in some Gorthor Brown as well. Not Gorthor Brown, I mean Ultron Grey. I've mentioned Gorthor Brown so many times during this video. It almost makes it look like it's the main color. And also taking your time and building up. What I sometimes like to do is use the air color from Citadel range because it's mixed in quite thinly, almost with an alcohol kind of medium. It makes it easier to handle in certain situations, especially for faces. I painted the eyes also with Ultron Grey and put a little black pip in the middle. And then you could have done this differently. The easiest tip to do eyes when you're a beginner is to do a black stripe with 2 white dots. Yeah, what you see me here is also painting the teeth. I painted the teeth with a almost yellowish color, some Racy Desert, and now I'm putting in the little detail on the eyes. And this is the final step. I put some red wash. It's a bit out of focus and out of sight, but I put some red wash really thin down alongside the nose and the eyes to make it more human-like. It's not just a white yellowish piece of the miniature, it's actually becoming more recognizable as a human. Because if you look at faces, they always have different kind of shades in them. They are the same color, but if you look at your cheeks, at your ears, at your nose, they're always a more warmer color because there's more blood flowing in these parts. When you compare it, for example, your forehead is almost is less reddish. It also makes the model as if it is in a battle indeed. Now here we are again with the famous color Gorthor Brown, painting in the stripes in the hair, just following the flow of the hair and also adding in some extra stripes because some parts of the model just weren't showing any texture at all in the hair parts. And ending with some Baneblade Brown. It's the same stripe but just a different length. I will only do the top side of the head and don't continue the line all the way down to make it look like the light is coming from above. Starting with the armor parts now. Painting the parts with Iron Warrior's base color again and putting in some silver from Vallejo. I don't really necessarily do edge highlighting with metallics. I like to do it a more natural textured way, putting in some spot highlights to the parts that are touched with light more than others. Especially when you shaded the miniature, that helps because it also makes it more satin finish. So parts that you are repainting also have a different sheen to it, and it will shine a lot more when the light touches. You see me here also using another Vallejo color, Oily Steel. It's almost the same as Lead Belcher, only a bit better consistency and easier to mix with the silver paint. Some Deathclaw Brown, really watered down. And I think 4 or 5 parts water and just a small part of Deathclaw Brown, and touch up some parts of the armor to make it look feel a bit rusty. Doing dry brush of dried bark, it's not a dry brush but the overbrush of Gorthor and Baneblade as well on the base, just to give it a bit more, just to give it a good look. Now we will repaint the rim of the base black, and we'll do that 2 times. But first we'll finish up putting some flock and some tufts on the base. I think I only did tufts, and I know I had to use some tweezers for this, but I couldn't find them, so I had to use my hands, and I don't really have tiny, also, I don't really have tiny fingers, so it's really hard to put them around the base. And you already see the Valhalla Blizzard ready. That will be the last step. So we do the second coat of black, and although you can't really see the difference at first, the difference is quite noticeable. And also makes it more durable, because you probably will pick up the model by the base. Some Valhalla Blizzard into the tufts, play around with it, making sure it's not one blob, and this is the end result. So if you like this video, comment down below what you would think, and see you next time.